Would you ask Dr Smith to come back in, please? Thank you. All right, Dr Smith, are you ready to carry on?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr Millett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Smith, can I next move on to the Euroclass system, which I think you will agree was introduced into the United Kingdom in 2002 as a result of the European Construction Products Directive?
Yes, correct.
Just accept from me, I think you know this anyway, that the standard which explains how Euroclass B is derived is EN 13501 Part 1.
Yes, correct. Yes.
Can we look, please, at the British standard in force at the time of the Grenfell Tower refurbishment at BSI 401738? Let's look at page 1 first of all to identify the document, and then go in it to page 40. There it is on page 1, and at page 40 we have the classification criteria. Page 40, please. Well, before, perhaps I can take this more shortly if there's a problem with the document.
You've got it now.
I think we've got it. Table 1. Classes of reaction to fire performance for construction products, excluding floorings and linear pipe thermal insulation products. Now, if you look just down the screen, you can see that there are various classes ranging from A1 at the top to F at the bottom, yes?
Yes.
And there are various classes that rely not on one single test, but a combination of tests.
Yes.
And that's true of Class B as well, isn't it?
Yes, it is, yeah.
We have 2 there, EN 13823 and also EN ISO 11925 Part 2. Now 13823 is the single burning item, or SBI test, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Do you agree that the SBI test was in basic terms introduced in order to replace the room corner test by providing a method by which the results of that test could be inferred without incurring the same cost in time and money?
No.
No, you don't agree?
No, I don't. The room corner test was the reference scenario which was used for the development of the single burning item test. It was never intended, as far as I'm aware, that the route classification would be using the ISO 9705 test method. It was a reference scenario.
And the reference, I think this is right, remained, didn't it, a fire within a room?
Yes, it did.
It did?
Yes.
Did you ever yourself consider whether that test was useful for assessing fire behaviour in circumstances far removed from the test scenario, for example, on the external face of a high-rise building?
Yes, I did consider that, and it clearly is not suitable for that. And much of the work in Europe has focused very much on the identification of relevant reference scenarios, which then form the basis for the development of a European test standard.
Well, let's just break that down a little bit, if we may. First, when did you consider or stop to consider the suitability of the single burning item test for the external face of a high-rise building?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Well, I asked you whether you'd ever considered whether the test was useful for assessing fire behaviour in circumstances far removed from the test scenario, namely, by example, external face of a building, and you said you did. My question is when?
I don't know exactly when, but from the time that I became involved in the European system, it was very evident of, the way that the test standard for the single burning item test, etc., was being developed in relation to reference scenarios. And there were discussions at the outset that a reference scenario was required for external fire performance as well.
Was that at the time when you were looking at harmonisation in 2000 and 2001?
Yes, I mean, the work obviously went on for very many years, and I wasn't involved in it during that whole period. It started, I think, in 1989, something like that. Other colleagues had been involved in that. But yes, I think I became involved around 2001.
And what made you think at the time that the single burning item test was not useful for assessing fire behaviour in relation to any element of an external face of a high-rise building?
Well, it relied on the classification derived from the ISO 9705 room corner test, which was internal linings within that room. And, it was very... there was a correlation derived between that one and the results from the single burning item test, to the extent that that was used to then define the class limits, which you now see in this table in front of you. So, and that was related to whether the room flashed over or not.
Yeah, it's about
Yes.
flashover, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And during that process, harmonisation or later, did you ever say, in very, very simple, almost lay terms, if I may, look, why have we got a test based on flashover being applied to the external build-up of a high-rise building?
Not in those terms, no. But
Why
I
is
mean,
that?
it was well understood through the fire sector in the UK and in Europe that the whole premise of the classification systems were based on reference scenarios. And there's a European guidance document that exists that sort of explains all of that.
In your own mind, were you confident at all times that government understood what you just told us?
Yes.
So Anthony Bird, Brian Martin, Bob Leadsom, as far as you
Well,
know.
I don't know about Bob Leadsom. I mean, I never really had any contact with Bob.
All right, but Anthony Bird, Brian Martin.
Yes.
Right. Now, on the concept of limited combustibility, and again, this may be oversimplifying it, but could you just tell us your understanding of that term?
Well, basically, you can claim that your product, your material, is of limited combustibility if you have carried out the tests as defined in the approved document B and achieved the pass criteria. And it's a term that's, it's defined within that context.
Yeah. And approved document B is table A7, I think, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
And just again, if this is oversimplification, please tell me, but is it the case that in the Euro norms, a limited combustibility is achieved by attaining A1 or A2 classes?
A2.
A2. Well, A1
wouldn't necessarily achieve limited combustibility. Well, it's non-combustible.
It's non-combustible.
Yes.
Exactly. A2 or better.
Yes.
Right. But B, C, and on down are not materials of limited combustibility.
Correct.
And was there a UK class, a national classification or standard for limited combustibility? There was, wasn't there?
Yes, that's what I just explained. I mean, it's how it's linked to the results that you get in the BS 476, part 4, not part 4, part 11.
11.
Yeah.
It's 11, isn't it?
Yes.
And 11
part
is what
4
is
for
mentioned.
non-combustibility.
Yes, and part 11 is what's mentioned in table A7, I think.
Correct.
Right. Did you consider, did you know, and were you clear in your own mind throughout your time at the BRE that a classification to class 0 and a classification of limited combustibility were different?
Yes.
Yes. And can you explain the difference?
Well, for a start, you can only claim each of the relevant classes dependent upon the outcomes from the test that you've carried out. So you carry out a different set of tests for for Class O than you do for limited combustibility.
But you
So-
can... Sorry.
Sorry, go on.
Yes. And are those differences the differences between National Class 476, Part 11, for limited combustibility as opposed to BS 476 Part 6 and 7?
Yes, absolutely.
For Class 0?
Yes.
And in the Euro norms, they're on the screen so we can keep to them.
Yes.
A2 or better, as opposed to B, slightly different tests or make-up of separate tests. Mm-hmm. Yes. But it's right, isn't it, also, I think, that Class 0 was always defined as being achievable in respect of a material or the surface of a composite product if it achieved limited combustibility?
I don't know whether it always was.
Do you know when it first was?
No.
And we'll maybe look into that
Yes.
in a little bit more detail later on. Has there been any stage in your career when you were unsure about the definitions or meanings or relationships between Class 0 and limited combustibility?
No.
I mean, listening to you today, it sounds like it's always been obvious meat and drink to somebody in your position at the BRE. Is that fair?
I mean, insofar as it's clearly defined in the approved documents, then yes, I suppose it is. It's always been clear.
Have you ever been aware at any time in your career, up to and including 2017, of others confusing or conflating the concepts of Class 0 on the one hand and limited combustibility on the other?
Not that I was aware of, no.
Not in the BRE?
No.
Not in government?
No.
Not in industry more widely?
No, not that people ever came to me to discuss that, no.
Was it always your view, looking at the converse, that the UK construction industry always clearly understood the difference between those concepts?
I had no reason to believe they didn't.
Right. So you never had any experience, you never saw anything which might lead you to think that industry had confused or conflated Class 0 with limited combustibility?
No. No.
Did anybody ever come to you from government or other bodies, trade bodies, industry bodies, and draw to your attention the fact that there might be such a confusion?
Not that I can recollect.
I want to ask you about Knowsley Heights. Fire in Liverpool, 5th of April 1991. If I'm wrong about the date, please correct me.
Well,
can I take it that you are or were aware of that fire?
I wasn't at the time. I was on maternity leave during 1991. So I wasn't involved at all in the fire investigation or whatever. I say my area of work at that time was on the computer modelling and fire dynamics research work.
When did you first come to learn of the Knowsley Heights fire?
I guess, I don't know the exact date, but it would have been probably around the time that the second edition of BR 135 was being drafted.
So that would be just before or in 2003?
Yes, around that sort of time.
Right. And what brought it to your attention? Do you remember?
It would probably have been, and I don't recall directly, but probably been around discussions that I might have had with Sarah, for example, Sarah Colwell.
Did you read the reports about that fire at that time?
No.
You didn't?
No.
Now, again, correct me, please, if I've got this wrong, but in 1988, Knowsley Heights had been refurbished and overclad as part of a pilot scheme between the FRS and the Estates Action Scheme, designed to improve energy efficiency and conditions in existing high-rise buildings. Do you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
You didn't know that. Can I take it that you had no involvement in any aspect of that programme at the time?
No, I didn't.
Have you ever subsequently heard that programme being discussed within the BRE or anywhere else?
No, other than recently in the context of the evidence to the public inquiry.
Now, I want to show you a document and see if you can help me with it. Can we go, please, to INQ 3014755? Now, this is a manuscript document. It's a handwritten note to a Mr. Sage from Lynn and it bears the date at the top, if you can see. It's 11th of April. Well, in fact, it's at the bottom, I think, 11th of April 1991. The date doesn't particularly matter. The month may be more important. It's April 1991. It's not a particularly easy document to read, so I just want to show you what it says where relevant. And it starts with a little 1 in the margin. You will wish, it says, to be aware of Alison Curtis's comments on the recent fire. First of all, do you know anybody called Alison Curtis who might have had anything to do with the fire? No. Second, 2, it says, we have received via HMEA a request from M Street Press Office to play down the issue of the fire. Our briefing for S of S is purely factual, and as far as I'm aware, Knowsley will not be making an issue of the fire. Now, first, have you ever seen this document before?
No.
Now, we know from a BRE document that I'm going to show you shortly that, in fact, Alison Curtis came from Housing Management and Estates Action at the DOE at the time.
Okay.
Have you ever heard anybody discussing this fire, Knowsley Heights, in these terms or anything similar?
No, I haven't.
So you never heard anybody discussing a request from government to play the Knowsley Heights fire down?
No. And,
right.
I mean, around that time, I would not have been involved in the fire investigation activities at all.
Now, in the light of that answer, let's see how we go with the next few questions. We know, and correct me again, the Knowsley fire was investigated by the BRE, and a report was produced in November 1992 under the Investigation of Real Fires contract. Did you know that?
No, not until...
Not at the time?
No, I didn't.
Right.
No.
Can we look at it? It's BRE 3035385. There's the first page of it. Do we take it that you had no involvement into any aspect of the BRE's investigation into this fire?
Correct.
And no involvement in any aspects of the report produced?
That's correct.
Do you remember whether you've ever read this document?
To my recollection, no, I have not.
Even in preparation to give evidence here?
I may have... I did help in terms of pulling all of these documents together so that they could be photocopied and submitted to you in evidence.
Right.
But no, I didn't sit down and sort of read every page of those.
Well, let's take it in stages. Let's see how we go. Can we go, please, to page 3, paragraph 5, under the heading "The Building"? And it refers to the 1988 refurbishment to reduce energy consumption. And then if you look at paragraph 6, which I think has been cut off on the left-hand side, it says in the second paragraph under the words "the building," in the third line, the 1988 scheme involved the use of a Class 0 GRP rain screen cladding on aluminium support rails. And it goes on after the reference there to Garnock, and it says that cavity barriers were not fitted to allow air unrestricted movement, and under the DPE BRE guidance at the time could be omitted where the cladding system was non-combustible. Were you aware that Knowsley Heights had been clad in Class 0 GRP rain screen?
Not at the time,
Not at the time, okay. If I asked you detailed questions about this report, I take it from your answers that you wouldn't be able to help me very much.
No, I'm afraid I can't. I mean, the person that would be able to potentially is Martin Shipp may have a better...
So far as you're concerned, we can take this as read.
Pardon, sorry?
So far as you're concerned, we can take this document as read.
Yes, I mean, I've got no comments that I can make on it.
Would it be right to say... I'm so sorry. Would it be right to say that in terms of external fire spread, the fire at Knowsley Heights at the time was considered to be a major fire event and one discussed and referred to in various pieces of research on external fire spread over the following years?
Yes, I believe so.
Yes. And that would include BRE research?
Yes, potentially.
Yes. Let's look at your statement then, please. Page 8, paragraph 24. At paragraph 24, you say this: following a fire in a refurbished block of flats in Liverpool in 1991, it was accepted that a large-scale fire test method was needed to provide a better means for assessing and controlling the potential fire hazards associated with external cladding systems. That test would involve the complete system installed as closely as possible to what would actually be installed onto a building. This was a clear recognition that it was not possible to rely on small-scale fire test data on individual elements, materials or components in a cladding system as a means to try to predict and thereby control the fire performance. Reliance on small-scale fire tests had been tried and had been shown to be inadequate. Mm-hmm. Now, is the fire that you're referring to there in the first line of that paragraph the Knowsley Heights fire?
Yes, I believe so.
And when you say it was accepted that a large-scale fire test method was needed, who was it accepted by?
That was in relation to the work that then followed on.
But who was it who accepted the need for a large-scale fire test?
Presumably the government department, as well as the research staff that were working in this area at BRE.
Right. You say presumably.
In the fire.
Do you know?
Well, I mean, I don't know the individuals precisely that would have been involved in that decision, but judging by the fact that that is the direction that the work took, then clearly there was an acceptance that that was the right direction to be going in.
I see. Do you know when that acceptance was... when was that accepted? Was there a moment when people in the BRE or in government, to your knowledge, realised or thought that a large-scale test was required?
Well, I think it was first flagged prior to this fire, in fact, in 1988, in the first edition of BR 135. And then, obviously, there was the follow-on work that then was conducted after this fire by Raymond Connelly and Tony Morris, that then, continued through the 1990s, really.
Was there a sense in which, although in 1988 the first edition of BR 135 had come out, that there wasn't a general acceptance that a large-scale fire test method was needed, but the Knowsley Heights fire was the catalyst for the acceptance of that?
Yes, I would say so.
I see.
I mean, the BR 135 in 1988 was sort of flagging trends that had been seen and issues that were potentially occurring, and the follow-on work and the funding to enable that followed through the 1990s.
Right. And what did you understand at the time you became familiar with the Knowsley fire about what the combustibility of the elements of the cladding system was? Was it non-combustible, limited combustibility, combustible? Do you know?
It was combustible.
And was that why it was then that there was acceptance of the need for a large-scale fire test method?
Yes, I believe so.
And you say that a large-scale test was needed, quote, to provide, as you can see, a better means for assessing and controlling the potential fire hazards associated with external cladding systems. A better means than what?
The small-scale fire test methods. So the Class O methodology had been shown to not be applicable within this case.
Right. So the BS 476 Part 6 and 7 tests on which guidance for the fire safety of external cladding systems was based.
Yes.
So the route to Class 0.
Yes.
Right. Now, focusing on the section of paragraph 24, where you say this was a clear recognition. Do you see? You say this was a clear recognition that it was not possible to rely on small-scale fire test data on individual elements, materials or components in a cladding system as a means to try to predict and thereby control the fire performance. Clear recognition, you say. By whom? By whom was this clearly recognised?
By the researchers at what was the fire research station, and given that they were working for the government customer also. Right.
So does that tell us that at some point before 2002 or 3, at least so far as you know, and at a time after 1991, the government was aware that small-scale fire tests were an inadequate basis for trying to predict and control a fire in the external cladding of a high-rise building.
Yes, I think the evidence was there from that one fire incident.
Was that a consensus, or were there dissenting voices?
I don't know.
Now, we don't see any evidence in the BRE November 1992 report on Knowsley of this clear recognition of which you speak. Do you know whether there's a document you've ever seen within the BRE which actually records that clear recognition?
No, I don't recall seeing a document in those terms.
Right. But you say it was widely shared. Was it within the BRE and, so far as you know, within government?
Well, the person that was leading on this work at the time was Tony Morris in the Fire Research Station, and, you know...
But it was your impression anyway?
Yes.
There was this clear recognition?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Does it follow that, from your perspective, it would be extremely dangerous to rely on the data generated by a BS 476 Part 6 and 7 test to try to predict the fire performance of external cladding systems, or to control the fire hazards associated with them?
Well, at that time, I wouldn't have had a particular view. But now, and looking at that now, yes, of course.
Right. At that time, I think you probably mean at some point between 1991 and 2002 or 3.
Yes.
Did there not then come a time after 2003, say, with the publication of BR 135 edition 2, that you espoused the views to which you speak here in paragraph 24 of your statement about small-scale tests?
Yes, I mean, I think it was, and it was absolutely my view, and I think that of other colleagues, that the way to control the fire performance of the cladding system would be to use the large-scale test method and the classification.
This is rather a broad question, forgive me, but did you ever think to point out to government in the clearest possible terms that the retention of class 0 in ADB, at least from 1992, if not earlier, in relation to the external wall, was dangerous?
Not in those terms, no.
Why is that?
Because ADB provided a range of measures, and it was not solely relying on Class O. It relied on also materials of limited combustibility, etc.
That's not right, is it? From 1992, at least, in the 1992 edition, if one looked at, from recollection, it's 12A of ADB, referred to the definition of Class 0 being achievable by one of two routes. One was limited combustibility, and the other alternative route was achieving the correct test result under 476 Part 6 and 7.
So I wasn't involved in approved document B back in 1992 either. But, you know, when I was involved from 2001 onwards, then, you know, there was a clear understanding of the direction that this was heading, or I believe there was a clear understanding of the direction that this was heading with the department.
And what direction was that? In
the sense that they were going to reference, based on the work of the Government House of Commons Select Committee and the inquiry after the Garnock Court fire, to basically produce a standard and a classification system that could then be used for external cladding systems, and it would be more representative and would be an adequate means for controlling the hazards associated with those cladding systems.
Nonetheless, you never said, did you, in all the years, whether at the time of the Select Committee investigation and report or the subsequent harmonisation process, you never said to government, you need to get Class 0 out of ADB in relation to external wall panels because it relies on small-scale tests and is therefore dangerous.
No, I didn't, but then I wasn't involved in the Parliamentary Select Committee either.
We'll come back to that.
Sorry, had you finished?
Yes, sorry, yeah.
We'll come back to that. I apologise for over-speaking. In paragraph 24 in the last line you say, reliance on small-scale fire tests had been tried and had been shown to be inadequate. Had they been shown to be inadequate by the fire at Knowsley Heights? Is that what you're referring to?
And in the experimental programme that followed.
Oh, what?
The experimental programmes that followed that work. The research projects, basically.
Right. No, I'm asking you this. I mean, I don't think there were a number, but are you referring to the Connelly tests?
Yes, and there were a number, but so there was a growing body of evidence.
Right. Did you give any consideration, apart from your conclusions about the dangers of reliance on small-scale test data after Knowsley, to the possibility of restricting combustibility of external cladding systems?
Restricting combustibility? In what way? I'm not sure I follow what you mean.
Well, insofar as combustibility is different from Class 0, or limited combustibility or non-combustibility are separate concepts, did you ever give any consideration to whether or not external cladding systems should be limited by reference to combustibility standards?
All right, so I mean, my view is, and still remains, that combustibility, non-combustible, is a binary concept. A material is either tested and is non-combustible, or it's combustible.
Yes.
And limited combustibility is a degree of combustibility. So, you know, it's not... Yeah, I mean, that's my view, and it always has been, and that's the way it was always explained to me and the way that I've always understood it.
Let's turn then to the work of Dr. Raymond Connelly in 1994, which I think was the first, perhaps, major set of tests done on full-scale test structures. Now, just on Dr. Connelly, it's right to think that he joined the BRE in 1991. Yes?
I couldn't confirm the date precisely. I mean, if that's what he said when he joined, I've no reason to disagree with that.
Yes. I mean, I think he was a co-worker of yours.
No, I never worked with.
You never worked with
Raymond
him,
Connelly,
right?
No.
Okay. He left, I should say, in 1996, which might help you. But I want to ask you about RCO 701, please. And this is his report. RCO 701. Now, this is a document we got from him, not the BRE, I should just tell you. And it's dated April 1994, and it's entitled Investigation of the Behaviour of External Cladding Systems in Fire, Report on 10 Full-Scale Fire Tests. Did you have any involvement in any aspect of the testing or the preparation of this report?
No, I didn't.
Have you ever read this report before?
I've read a partial copy fairly recently, because that is all that BRE had in its archive.
So you didn't read it at the time?
No, I would have had no reason to. I wasn't working in that area.
Do you know what caused it to be commissioned by the DOE?
I'm assuming it was to do with Knowsley Heights.
Are you aware of the findings in this report, or not at all?
I'm aware of the conclusions.
Right. Although you weren't involved in the testing or the report at the time, were you aware it was going on?
I suppose vaguely. I mean, the thing to mention here is that all of this work, large-scale work, was done up at the Cardington Laboratory, which was remote from the headquarters, if you like, of the Fire Research Station. So, you know, unless you were up there, you wouldn't know or be aware of exactly what was going on up at Cardington.
Was this report disseminated internally and available to everybody at the BRE, or was it?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Not. Do you remember discussing at least the conclusions with any of your colleagues at the time or later?
No, I didn't see it at the time. No.
Are you able to tell us why, when the inquiry asked for a copy of this document from the BRE, there was none in the BRE's possession?
I can only assume that obviously Raymond Connelly had left the business and he would have handed all of this information over to Tony Morris at the time, I would assume, and then Tony Morris equally left the business. And over the years, documents get moved around and documents get cleared out as well, you know, to make space. You know, you don't have an infinite archive available. So from time to time, people will clear things out. And if it was in a bundle of information, you know, it may have got inadvertently thrown away.
Can we look, please, at CLG 100038883? This is an email on your screen in an exchange in July 2009 between you and Brian Martin, with Anthony Bird and Sarah Colwell copied in. And we can see on the screen your email of 8th of July 2009 at 2:27 p.m. And in the first paragraph you say this: "Hi Brian, I tried to call you earlier but you were not available. I've spoken with Sarah this morning and she has retrieved the attached report which reports that there were over 3,000 tower blocks in the UK representing about 225,000 homes capable of housing almost 1 million people. This is based upon a client report written by Ray Connelly in 1994. Sarah has also located a CD with all the reports from the external cladding project. Please let us know if you would like a copy at this stage." Now, were you sending Dr. Connelly's 1994 research report itself to Brian Martin, or were you sending a different document which quoted from or referred to Dr. Connelly's report?
I don't recall. I don't know.
Do you know why you were sending whatever it was you were sending at the time?
No. Is there any other emails in the chain?
Well, because I've lost my remote system at the moment, I can't tell you. But
Oh.
I can ask you this question. This email was sent 5 days after the fatal fire at Lacal House, which happened on the 3rd of July 2009.
Right.
My question is, was the fire at Lacal House what prompted this discussion?
It may well have been, but I can't confirm that.
Had Brian Martin, do you remember, asked for some particular information from the BRE in the wake of Lacal?
It looks as though he was asking if we had anything associated with the number of tower blocks, etc.
Right, I see. Can we take it from the use of your word retrieved that by 2009 Dr. Connelly's 1994 report wasn't readily available, at least to you and Sarah Colwell?
That may well have been the case,
Right.
but I don't recall that.
Can we go, please, to Raymond Connelly's statement? That's at BRE 3047667. And I'd like to go to page 6, please. and about 6 lines up from the bottom of the page, he says it was always, on the right-hand side, can you see?
Yes, yes.
He says, it was always obvious to me from the department's consistent support or funding of the research being undertaken at BRE into external wall systems from 1992 onwards, that the department was aware of potential limitations with their historical approach to the issue. The department modified / improved their guidance between the 1985 and 1992 versions of approved document B in respect of external wall systems. However, the conflict between fire safety requirements in terms of providing cavity barriers and the need for ventilation of cavities to avoid dampness posed challenges for the department. My recollection is that resolution of these conflicting requirements by employing a more holistic approach to fire safety design was one of the prime motivating factors behind the department's support of the new research. Are you able to agree with what he says there?
I don't know whether that was the main motivation for it or not. I'm not aware that it was to do with conflicting requirements.
Did you share the view in 1994 or after that, perhaps, that the department was aware of potential limitations with their historical approach to the issue?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. And what led you to that?
Well, the very fact that they were continuing to fund further work in this area.
And what limitations in particular do you think the department was aware of in relation to their historical approach?
The inadequacy, as we've already discussed, of the small-scale test methods.
Now, did you understand that the principal objective of the work, and again, bearing in mind what you've told us about your familiarity with it, but did you understand that the objective of the work was to assess the effectiveness of installation of fire barriers in reducing the fire hazard?
What, of Dr. Connelly's work?
Yes.
Yes, I mean, I guess that was part of the issue.
Now, if we stick with his report, please, and go to page 9, paragraph 21, he says at A on that page, the test at the top of the screen, it's now gone, there it is. The tests were designed to try to discriminate between different external wall systems in terms of their fire performance. The main focus was on developing the most appropriate heat source. Now, help us, heat source, does that mean the crib?
Yes.
It does?
Yes, it will do.
And does that accord with your understanding that that was a main focus of his experimental work, so far as you were familiar with?
I mean, it would obviously be part of what you had to do en route to developing a methodology. And you would have to look at, what was relevant in terms of the thermal exposure.
Looking at D, he says, I cannot recollect, but likely to have been chosen as representative of systems commonly used within the industry. And then if you look, please, at G, at the very foot of the screen, at the very end of the page, he says, the nature of the research proposal would likely, in my opinion, to have been to identify a problem, in this case real-world fire incidents as exemplified by Knowsley Heights, and real-world technical constraints associated with the need to maintain open ventilated cavities to avoid dampness, and to identify a potential solution, i.e. a means of examining all of the relevant variables in a holistic manner by means of a full-scale test, rather than relying on the existing component-by-component rules, for example, class 0 sheeting and provision of story-level cavity barriers. And he goes on to say that test 2 was designed to be representative of, although not to replicate exactly, the external cladding system used at Knowsley Heights. Now, does all of that I've just read to you and told you accord with your understanding of the focus and aim of Dr. Connelly's work?
I can understand what he's saying there. And if that's his account of the aim of the work, then I have no reason to dispute that.
And if we look, please, at the next page of his statement, paragraph 22E, he says, I had no expectations that a reaction to fire rating of class 0 would be sufficient to mitigate against fire spread over the surface of the material in the context of subject test. Class 0 is determined based on what I would term loosely a bench test. I say this recognising that BS 476 Part 7 radiant test panel is not, strictly speaking, bench scale. And then he says, Class 0 is a surface-based measure of performance appropriate to wall and ceiling linings and offers no information about the combustibility of the material or its mechanical integrity at high temperatures. Now, I think, given your evidence earlier, Dr. Smith, you would agree with that last sentence.
Predominantly, although it is possible to have a product that has a very thin coating that gets burnt away and then exposes the material or substrate beneath that. And then, of course, you are actually carrying out the test on the substrate, the material beneath that. So there are a few, exceptions to that.
But generally speaking, your point about the unreliability of these small-scale tests.
Yeah, the key thing with these small-scale tests, and in the case of Class O and the Part 6 and Part 7 tests, is that you're unable to install them with a representative fixing system. You can go as far as to install them with a different substrate behind them or with an air gap, but that's about as far as you can go. So you can't replicate some of the important design variables that are potentially important when it comes to large-scale systems.
Did you or the government consider either before or particularly after the Connelly 1994 work whether Class 0 was an appropriate classification requirement for external surfaces of a tall building, given the nature of the tests and its origins as a measure of performance for wall linings?
So I don't know what the government considered or what they didn't. And I say it wasn't until sort of 2001 when I became aware of this sort of work and with the involvement of a new research project in this area that we gave any thought or consideration to it personally. I mean, there may have been others at BRE or Fire Research Station that did, of course.
Now, just looking at Test 2, and I'll take this quickly with you, Dr. Smith, given your evidence about your familiarity with this report, but can we go, please, to the report itself, RCO 701, page 12. And under the heading, at the very foot of your screen, fire properties of sheet cladding materials, it says, the polyester-bound sheet and the thermosetting resin-bound sheet achieve a Class 0 rating as described in Approved Document B of the Building Regulations 1991-2. On both the front and rear faces, a Class 0 rating is derived from performance of the material in both the surface spread of flame and fire propagation tests described in BS 476 Part 6 and 7. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's the other way round. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And then if you go, please, to page 16, we can see the report for Test 2, which that's where it starts. And you can see it says polyester-bound sheet with no fire barriers, and there's the system description. And then if you go, please, to page 18, in the last paragraph on that page, these are the conclusions from the Test 2 test, and it says this. There was unlimited vertical spread of the fire over the full height of the test facility. The flames would probably have spread to upper stories had they been present. The horizontal spread of fire was limited, however, and it appears that the aluminium sheeting rails are effective fire barriers even though they do melt. It is clear that the reaction to fire properties of the sheeting material do not give a true indication of the potential fire hazard. There's clearly a need for some form of fire barrier protection with the polyester-bound sheet cladding. At page 46, if we go to that, please, in the fourth paragraph down in the report, it says, "It is clear that BS 476 parts 6 and 7 do not accurately reflect the fire hazards that may be associated with cladding systems. Reasons may include the fact that the flame movement in a real cladding fire is in the vertical direction as opposed to the horizontal direction in the test." And then the last paragraph on that page says, "It is clear from the experimental work undertaken at Cardington that a cladding material achieving a Class 0 rating may suffer extensive surface burning. This burning often spread to the top of the test building, some 9 metres, and would have spread further if possible. Few fire barrier systems successfully reduced the fire spread." Now he is, isn't he, expressly saying here that Class 0 classification was not a reliable way in which to assess the fire hazards presented by external cladding panels, at least on the basis of the results of Test 2 here.
That's my reading of that, yes.
Yes. And do I take it from your evidence that you've given so far that you wouldn't express surprise at that conclusion?
No, given that this is part of the evidence that I would use to derive that view as well. So, yeah. So it's a bit tautological.
Yes, I see that. I understand that. In his witness statement, and I'm summarising, there's no need to go back to it, Dr Connelly tells us that this was not a new discovery and that there was no reason that it would have needed any kind of emergency response from the government. Now, did you, for your part, at any stage consider the reliance in approved document B on Class 0 through diagram 40 as it became, on small-scale testing to be a matter which needed to be addressed as a matter of urgency?
I mean, I wouldn't have had a view at the time that this report was written, because, as I say, I wasn't involved in this work at all.
No. But later, did you ever come to the conclusion that reliance in approved document B, and particularly diagram 40 on Class 0, was something which needed to be addressed urgently?
I mean, I think we came to the view that the fire performance of cladding systems in general did need to be addressed, and that was obviously promulgated as well by the Garnock Court fire. Mm-hmm. And I say, and that's what led to the work that followed on from that, and that was done as quickly and expediently as possible, for the very reason that that would yield a means by which those hazards could be controlled better.
Well, it would yield a means by which those hazards could be controlled better if they were the sole route to compliance with ADB, but they weren't, were they? Class 0 remained one of the linear routes to compliance.
On its own, it wasn't a means for compliance. You couldn't just test the outer surface and ignore everything else in a cladding system. That's my reading of the approved document. Well,
we're getting ahead of ourselves, okay. But would you accept this much? Class 0 remained in diagram 40 and in what became 12.6 of approved document B right up until the time of the Grenfell Tower fire. It was never removed.
Yes, that's correct.
And yet Class 0, relying as it did on small-scale tests, which you were known by you to be unreliable as a predictor of external fire spread and proven to be so by Test 2 here.
Sorry, is that a question
yes.
or a statement? Yes, but I mean the content of the approved document is in itself something that BRE, even back when we were part of government, had very little autonomy over in terms of controlling that content. It always went through, as far as I understand it, a process, and I'm certainly familiar with the process that's been followed in more recent years. And ultimately the decisions are taken by the BRAC committee and the government of the day. So, I mean, certainly when the European classes were introduced in 2002, there had been an expectation shared by, a number of people, including myself, that the old national classes would all be removed at that stage. However, they were not, and that was a decision taken by BRAC, the department, etc., based on decisions and views around potential costs to industry if that happened, and cost-benefit analyses and that were carried out. So, you know, there were higher decision makers, I guess, that were dictating what could and couldn't be done.
Who were they?
I wouldn't know. I mean, I was never involved in BRAC. I don't know what the recommendations were around that at the time. And ultimately, you know, as I've always understood it, the Secretary of State has to sign off on the approved documents before they're published. So these issues around cost to industry, etc., would have been debated within the department and the views formulated.
We'll come back to that, I think, in due course when we look at the harmonisation and your involvement in it in 2000 and 2001. For the moment, though, let's just look at what Dr. Connelly says about cavity barriers. Can we please go to the report here at page 48, just 2 pages on, and just look at one or two of his conclusions on that briefly. Paragraph 5, he says, under the conclusions, the only fire barriers to be found to be adequate in effectively reducing the fire hazard were those which were substantially fixed to the masonry substrate and fitted independently of the aluminium sheeting rails. Then at paragraph 9, at the foot of the page, he says, the nature of the fire barriers required to prevent fire spread depends on the nature of the cladding material itself. While certain types of fire barrier systems were found to be adequate with some sheeting materials, they were inadequate with others. And then 10 over the page, if we turn the page, 10, the only fire barriers which substantially reduce the fire hazard require that the vertical sheeting rails be cut at regular intervals. Consequently, such a barrier system may be unwieldy and expensive to fit in practice. And then 11, any attempt to limit the fire hazard by specification of details of a satisfactory fire barrier system will prove very difficult without consideration of the nature of the cladding material itself. To decide on the necessary fire protection, each cladding system needs to be evaluated in its own right. Now, when you first saw this report, or perhaps even now, did you or do you agree with those 4 conclusions?
I suppose my only concern with the conclusions as written and without seeing the rest of the report is it's not clear what fire barriers he's talking about and what types of fire barriers were actually tested. And given that this was back in 1994, how relevant that is now to practice today and the types of systems that are available today in terms of barriers, that would be my concern around that.
Do you think it's right to say that appropriate cavity barrier systems can only be decided by consideration of the specific cladding product with which they are to be used?
Details of... In principle, yes.
Yes. And do you remember whether that aspect of the report was ever discussed by you or any of your colleagues at the BRE internally?
I don't know.
Or what about with government, do you know?
No, I don't know.
Finally on this, can I just ask you about what he says at page 49 under paragraph 12, where he says, for the rational design of cladding systems, there is a clear need for full-scale testing of performance in fire. Such tests would help determine the adequacy of fire barrier systems when used in conjunction with a particular sheeting system. And I think you told us, we covered this before, you agree with that?
Yes.
Yes. And we'll come on to discuss later the BRE's development of full-scale testing, which culminated in BS 8414 Part 1 and then Part 2. But just for now, do you know whether any consideration was given by the BRE or the department to any options other than the development of a full-scale test as a response to this work?
I don't.
You don't?
No.
So do we take it from that there was no consideration given to restricting the combustibility of external cladding panels?
I don't know.
And we can see that the combustible nature of the rain screen as an element in the external wall build-up is not directly addressed in Dr Connelly's 1994 report. Is it the case that it wasn't intended to address that problem or question? Do you know?
No, I don't know. But, research, you present the results and the facts that you've unearthed, and then sometimes you reveal something that you didn't intend to reveal, but you don't, you're open with that, and that's exactly what's happened here. So it wouldn't matter really if that was an objective or not. If that's what the research showed, then, and that's what's been reported, that is that.
Do I take it that from that answer, and indeed the other answers that you've been giving, that from 1994, nobody at the BRE or within government or between the two ever considered either getting rid of Class 0 or reinforcing the non-combustible nature of external cladding?
I can't comment on that. I mean, I say the person that was leading on all of this research and that Raymond Connelly reported to was Tony Morris, and he had a regular dialogue with the department at the time. So I'm sure, a number of these things probably would have been discussed. No reason to think they wouldn't have been. But of course, there's no evidence to say one way or the other.
But I'm asking you about your recollection.
Well, I have no recollection because I just was not involved, so.
I'd like to turn next to the development of Fire Note 3 and the submission to the department, as it was then, the DETR. Can we please go to BRE 405868? And there is Fire Note 3, and it is authored by Tony Morris, Sarah Colwell, David Smith, and two others, including Mr. Connelly himself, Ray Connelly, there, who was a consultant.
Okay.
And it was published by the BRE, I think, in 1998. Is that right?
It will say when it was published
Page
on
2.
the inside
I can go
cover.
to page 2.
Yes.
I think we can probably cure. Yeah, it says 1988. You can just see that there. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Now, in simple terms, is this right? It's a method being proposed here for full-scale testing of the fire performance of a cladding system.
That's my understanding.
Did you have any involvement in any aspect of the development of Fire Note 3?
No.
Do you know which team or division within the BRE was responsible for the development of Fire Note 3?
Yes, it was the team that was led by Tony Morris.
Tony Morris's team, as we can see from the title. In 1998, you were head of the reaction to fire team, weren't you?
Yes.
Yes.
And computational simulation, yeah.
And we can see, as I've just shown you, let's go back to page 1, one of the authors of Fire Note 3 included Sarah Colwell, didn't it?
Yes.
And you told us earlier that you oversaw Sarah Colwell's work from, I think, 1997 onwards.
Yes.
So did that include her work on Fire Note 3?
No.
Why is that?
Because Tony Morris would have been the project leader on this, and as I explained earlier, if there were cross-departmental projects, then the people working on that project would report into, the project manager.
Did you see this report at all at the time?
I don't recall seeing it at the time, no. And I would have had no reason to. I mean, if it was published in 1998, the work would have been completed before that, and the draft report would have been published before that. I don't know how long before that, but because it takes a period of time for them to be published in this way.
Do you know what Sarah Colwell's role on that project was?
Not in detail, no, I don't.
Now, do you know what the specific circumstances or what the impetus was which led to the development of this test method?
No, I don't.
Do you know whether it was developed in conjunction with industry or particular manufacturers?
No, I don't.
Do you know how the specific performance criteria in Fire Note 3 were selected?
No, I don't.
Do you know why no failure criteria were set for mechanical response?
No,
you don't.
I don't.
Let's then move on to Garnock Court. That's a fire which happened at Garnock Court in Irvine in Scotland on the 11th of June 1999, wasn't it?
Yes.
I mean, you may not recall the precise date, but take it from me that
yes.
it was. You mentioned this fire in your statement at paragraph 28 at page 9. I don't think I need to take you to that, but you mentioned the vertical fire spread. Mm-hmm. Is that the fire you're referring
yes.
to? Were you aware at the time of the fire of the circumstances of that fire?
No.
You describe it in your statement as significant. Would you agree that in the timeline, if you like, of the history of fire events in the United Kingdom, it was another major fire event on that timeline?
Yes, I would.
And is that partly because it resulted in a fatality?
Yes, and the fact that the fire spread from, up the entire side of the building.
Yes. Now, like Knowsley Heights, Garnock Court was another local authority block of flats which had been refurbished, wasn't it?
I believe so. I don't know all the details.
Take it from me. In fact, it was refurbished in 1991, the year of the Knowsley fire,
right.
and clad in GRP, glass-reinforced plastic panels.
Okay.
I mean, were you aware of that at the time of the fire?
No.
We weren't. We know that from the subsequent BRE report. I can show it to you if you like. But,
no, that's fine.
Yes, I think you agree that. Do you remember when you first learnt about the Garnock Court fire?
I would have been sort of vaguely aware, in the sense that it led to the parliamentary inquiry and the subcommittee sort of investigation, and I was aware that obviously Sarah Colwell and Peter Field and Tony Morris were going to give evidence.
Yes, we'll come to that shortly. Before we look at that, did you know what GRP was?
Yes, I did know what GRP.
You'd heard of it?
Yes.
Now, did you know that GRP was combustible?
I'm not sure I'd ever carried out any experiments with GRP personally, but I would have expected it to have been.
Now, after the fire, the inquiry has become aware that the BRE investigated and produced, in fact, 3 reports into the fire. Let me just tell you what they are, and we can identify them by reference. The first was the report prepared for the North Ayrshire Council, bearing the reference 79902, dated the 8th of September 1999, and that is at BRE 3035377. We'll have a look at it in a moment. The second was prepared for North Ayrshire Council and bears the reference 81310 and is dated the 5th of May 2000, the reference to which is BRE 3035377, at page 22. And the third is a report from August 2000, dated, I think in fact dated August 2000, for the DETR, Anthony Bird, and that's BRE 3035375, and entitled the DETR Framework Project Report, Investigation of Real Fires, project number 76572, June 1999 to April 2000. Now, first, did you have any involvement in any aspect of the investigation into the fire at Garnock Court?
No, I didn't.
And what about any involvement in the preparation of any of the 3 reports I've referred to?
No, I didn't.
Do you know who was involved in that work?
In terms of the fire investigation, I don't, off the top of my head, no. I mean...
You don't?
No.
Have you read these reports before?
No.
You've never read them?
No.
Now, there's one aspect of the reporting of this fire that we are keen to get the BRE's assistance on. We've already asked a number of witnesses. Let me ask you about it. I'd like to have up, please, on the screen the first of the two reports prepared for North Ayrshire, namely BRE 000035377, and also on the screen at the same time the reports submitted to the department in August 2000 under the Investigation of Real Fires framework at BRE 000035375. Now, just in general terms, if we can have them both up on the screen at the same time, please. So the left-hand side, as you can see, is the September 1999 report to North Ayrshire, and the right-hand side is the August 2000 report under the framework Investigation of Real Fires project prepared for Anthony Bird. Now, just in general terms, you may have heard the questions put to previous witnesses, but the reports to North Ayrshire Council make numerous references to Class 0, and in particular to the fact that the cladding at Garnock Court should have had a Class 0 classification, whereas the BRE's Investigation of Real Fires report to the DETR makes no mention of Class 0 at all. Now, first, is that something you've ever been aware of?
No, not until the evidence presented.
Right.
Here.
I see. So you can't explain why the references to Class 0 have been removed by the BRE?
No, I can't. Presumably Martin Shipp has been asked that question.
But I'm asking you.
Yeah,
you can't tell me.
No, but he would be, I would suggest, the person that would be most likely to be able to help you with that.
Right. Well, let's just try one reference to this and see how we go. Could we please have up at the same time, please? If we go, please, to on the left-hand side of the page, page 6, paragraph 3.1.1, and you'll see, and at the same time, on the right-hand side, let's please have page 4, top of the page. We've got the paragraph that says remedial measures, and in the left-hand side, you can see there's a sentence which says the spandrel panel. Can you see halfway down?
Yes.
The spandrel panel to be an external insulated render of panels between the windows of either a non-combustible or Class 0 material. And if you look at the right-hand side, third line down, it says the spandrel panel to be an external insulated render of panels between the windows of a non-combustible material. No reference to Class 0 there. Mm-hmm. Do you know why not?
No, I don't.
And this, can we take it, and we can shorten this, can we take it that the same would apply if one does a comparison between both reports?
Yes.
You can't help?
No, I can't. I wasn't involved in either. And obviously I didn't see the report at the time.
Can you think of any reason why the BRE would not set out the observations that they'd set out about Class 0 and combustibility to North Ayrshire in the same way to DETR?
Well, no, I can't really. The only possibility might be that more information became available if they were done at different times. And I don't know which one was done first, but maybe the information was clarified. Best practice would be then to revise the other report to reflect any changes, but no, I can't.
Right. But can you think of any new information that came up as a result of any further investigation which would justify the deletion of all reference to Class 0 in the report that went to the DETR?
No, I can't, but that's the only possibility. More information became available from the fire service or the council or whatever, that meant that whatever was there originally wasn't correct.
You don't know?
No, I don't.
You're speculating, I think.
Yes, I am.
Now, let's then turn to the 1999 Select Committee recommendations. And Mr. Chairman, I think looking at the time, now would be an appropriate moment for the break.
Right. Well, we always have a break during the session, so we'll take a break now. We'll resume, please, at 3:30. And when we're out of the room, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with it. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Millett. 3:30. Thank you. Would you ask Dr Smith to come back in, please? Right, Dr Smith, all
Yes,
ready to keep going?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr Billy.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Smith, I'd like now to turn to the 1999 Select Committee and the recommendations. Now, you mention the committee hearings in your statement, at paragraph 28 on page 9. We don't need to go to them, but I think you are aware that following the Garnock Court fire, a Parliamentary Select Committee inquiry was established by what was then the Environment Subcommittee of the Environment, Transport and Regional Affairs Committee to investigate the potential risks of fire spread posed by external cladding systems, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Now, it's right, I think, that you didn't yourself attend the evidence session to that inquiry in July 1999.
That's correct.
But Sarah Colwell, Tony Morris and Peter Field, so far as we can see from the records, did attend.
That's my understanding.
And now Tony Morris, you've mentioned his name a number of times. We've seen his name as a project lead on Fire Note 3. And I think he was the project leader on Fire Note 9, wasn't he?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Yes. I just want to look at some of the recommendations made by the Select Committee in their report after the evidence. We can find that at CLG 3019478. Now, we've gone in on page 8. Let's go to page 1, please, because we'll get the date of this document, which is the 14th of December 1999, as you can see on your screen. Did you read this document at the time it was published?
Probably not at that time.
Why so?
It wasn't an area that I was actually involved in.
Right. Were you not interested to follow what had happened at this Select Committee?
I would have probably read it around 2000 with the subsequent work, but I don't actually recall when I read it.
Right.
Obviously, I have read it.
Right. Can we take it, you say, from about 2000? I mean, about 2000 happened 2 weeks after the 14th of December 1999.
Okay.
But it's short, I mean, in the months after it was published?
Yes, I think.
Yeah, okay. Now, let's look at page 8, please. Let's look at page 8, paragraphs 14 to 16 together. At the foot of the page, it says, the inquiry also prompted further research at the Fire Research Station of the Building Research Establishment, BRE. The conclusions arising from this research, which was carried out in 1994, support the claims of our witnesses that the small-scale tests upon which the existing guidance relies are insufficient properly to evaluate the performance of complete cladding systems in a fire, and that there is therefore a clear need for full-scale testing. And then there's a footnote, 24, and if you just scroll, please, or have scrolled to you, at the very foot of the page, you'll see that the reference under footnote 24 is to the Connelly work in April 1994, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. And if you then go on, please, to page 9, paragraph 15, top of your screen, it says, BRE proceeded to develop an appropriate full-scale fire test known as a test for assessing the fire performance of external cladding systems. This test was submitted to the DETR in 1996, and then there's a footnote there. Witnesses suggested that this test would be a considerable improvement on the small-scale testing which is currently carried out to ascertain the fire performance of materials used in external cladding systems. And then 16, other witnesses suggested that this test would not be suitable for all external cladding systems, and in particular it would not be a suitable method of testing the fire performance of infill systems, such as that which was involved in the fire at Irvine. However, we note the view of Peter Field of BRE, which developed the test, who told us, quotes, we believe the test facility itself could be accommodated to assess the fire performance of systems which are not the same as total cladding systems and may involve windows and decorative panels, close quotes. The advice we have received concurs with this opinion. Now, against that background, can we please then go to paragraph 19 under the heading, the adequacy of the regulations pertaining to their use. And paragraph 19, we can see the following recommendation. In bold, it says, notwithstanding what we've said in paragraph 18, we do not believe that it should take a serious fire in which many people are killed before all reasonable steps are taken towards minimizing the risks. and then it says in ordinary print, the evidence we have received strongly suggests that the small-scale tests which are currently used to determine the fire safety of external cladding systems are not fully effective in evaluating their performance in a, quotes, live, unquotes, fire situation. As a more appropriate test for external cladding systems now exists, we see no reason why it should not be used. And then 20. We believe that all external cladding systems should be required either to be entirely non-combustible or be proven through full-scale testing not to pose an unacceptable level of risk in terms of fire spread. And then in bold, the recommendation. We therefore recommend that compliance with the standard set in the test for assessing the fire performance of external cladding systems, which has been submitted to the British Standards Institution for adoption as a British standard, be substituted in approved document B for previous requirements relating to the fire safety of external cladding systems. Now, when you read that, as you say you did in the early months of 2000, that recommendation that I've just read to you at the bottom of page 9 and onto page 10 in paragraph 20, what did you understand that recommendation to mean?
Basically that we needed to move towards more reliance on the large-scale fire test method as an alternative to a system being non-combustible. As
a simultaneous alternative or as a replacement, Dr. Smith?
As a replacement.
Yes. So you understood that it meant that small-scale testing would be replaced by a full-scale test method if this recommendation was carried into effect?
Yes.
Yeah. Let's now go to the Department's response to the committee's recommendations. We find that at CLG 140347. Now, it's difficult to attribute a date to this, but we understand that it was published on the 6th of April 2000. And if we go to page 1, the title is Government Response. Just go back to page 1. I'm so sorry. Government response to the first report of the Environment, Transport and Regional Affairs Committee on potential risk of fire spread in buildings via external cladding systems. And then if you go to page 2, please, in paragraph 5, it sets out the Department's details of the consultation which has taken place on the amendments to the 1992 version of approved document B, which is the version of ADB as it then stood. Yes?
Yes.
I'm summarising it, perhaps, inelegantly. Did you see that at the time, do you think?
What, the proposals for the amendments?
Yes.
I doubt I would have seen those.
Do you remember whether you saw this report in general?
No, I don't remember whether I saw this report in general, and it's unlikely at that time that I would have seen it.
Right. Let's just look at paragraph 6. It says this. During the review, there was no suggestion that the guidance given in the approved document was insufficient or, if followed, would tend to create an unsafe scenario in a fire situation with respect to external cladding. Now, leaving aside, Dr. Smith, the question of whether or not there was any such suggestion within the responses to the government's consultation on approved document B at the time, did you agree in 2000, when you looked at this, that there was no suggestion that the guidance given in approved document B was insufficient or, if followed, would tend to create an unsafe scenario in a fire situation with regard to external cladding?
As I said earlier, I don't recall seeing this at the time. I mean, who prepared this?
Well, this is written by Nick Rainsford MP, who was the sponsoring minister, effectively.
Okay. Because it said, talking about him giving evidence. I don't recall seeing this.
Well, you said you did earlier. I just wonder.
Not this. It was the previous document.
So you didn't see this report?
No, I don't recall seeing this report.
This is the government's response.
This is the response. Yeah. You didn't see this at the time.
I don't recall seeing this.
But my question. Let me try to get it a different way. On what you knew at the time, and looking at what you read in the report at the time, you do say you read. Was it your view that there was no suggestion as a fact that the guidance given in approved document B was insufficient or, if followed, would tend to create an unsafe scenario in a fire situation with respect to the external cladding?
I mean, it's an odd statement, given that there had been a fire and there'd been an inquiry that had led.
Can I just interrupt? If I read this correctly, Mr. Millett, the first line of paragraph 6 is referring to the review which is described in paragraph 5. So there was a review by the BRAC working group, and during that review, which of course I think Dr. Smith will not have seen, not sure we have either, there was no suggestion that the guidance was insufficient. It doesn't follow that that is Dr. Smith's own view, but I think the question perhaps should be put in a more direct way.
Yes, let me try it differently. I see that. I accept that. Let me try it this way. I think it's wrong, isn't it, to say that if you were yourself asked whether the guidance given in approved document B was insufficient or if followed would tend to create an unsafe scenario in a fire situation with respect to external cladding, your answer would be that it was insufficient and would tend to create an unsafe scenario.
Probably, if I'd been asked the question at the time.
Yes. And did that view, counterfactually though it may have been, was that view formed as a result, at least in part, of the Garnock Court fire?
Yes.
Yes. Now, I think you say that the committee recommended that BRE 135 should be revised to reflect the types of products and cladding systems that were then in use, and that a large-scale fire test standard should be published by British Standards Institute. That's paragraph 29. We'll come on to look at that, but that's right, isn't it? That's your recollection?
Yes.
Yes. Now, I'd like to look at how this then developed. Fire Note 9 is the next stopping point. Fire Note 9, I think, was dated 1999, wasn't it?
I don't know without looking, but it should be in the inside cover.
Let's go to CTAR 6019, and you can see there it is. It's authored by Sarah Colwell and David Smith, and it's entitled Assessing the Fire Performance of External Cladding Systems, a Test Method. And if we go to page 2, you see, as you rightly say, the date, 1999.
Yes.
Now, do you know whether this was published before or after the evidence given to the Select Committee, which of course was in July 1999?
I don't know that. I mean, Sarah Colwell may have a recollection of that.
Now, at the time it was published, I think you were head of the Reaction to Fire team.
Correct.
Would it have been you who approved this document?
I don't know. I don't recall approving it, and I would not have been the final signatory anyway. It would have been, the final signatory would have been Peter Field. Right.
Final signatory Peter Field, but Sarah Colwell reported to you at this time, yes?
She did. If Tony Morris was the project manager under which this was developed, then she would have reported to him in relation to this work.
Right. That doesn't necessarily mean that you didn't see it at the time, does it?
No, it doesn't. I mean, I've seen it since, of course, and it's very difficult to remember at the time whether I actually saw it then and you know,
right,
made any comments on it.
All right. Now, let's try it this way. Did you understand Sarah Colwell to be leading on the development of Fire Note 9, subject to the supervision of Peter Field?
Yes.
Now, let's go to her statement, please, at BRE 30/47571, page 19, paragraph 127. She says this: Fire Note 9 did not develop a new test method. It was a revision of Fire Note 3. Fire Note 9 contained no technical changes to the methodology or assessment criteria in Fire Note 3. The primary revisions were A, setting a limit on the maximum thickness of sample which could be tested, B, inclusion of a definition section, and C, a graphical example of determination of test start time and temperature. Now, from what you know of this, is that right?
Yes, as far as I'm aware, yes.
She goes on to say, if we go to page 20, please, at the foot of that page, paragraph 134, she says that the process by which Fire Note 9 was developed can be described as a review of the format in which Fire Note 3 was presented in order to bring it in line with the approach used by standardisation bodies such as the BSI, and to conform with MHCLG and industry stakeholders that the classification, methodology and associated performance limits based on the work already completed in the development of Fire Note 3 were still acceptable. Do you agree with that?
If that's what Sarah's recollection is, then I have no reason to disagree with that.
Was that your understanding of the way in which Fire Note 9 came to be developed?
I don't recall.
With whom at the MCLG were the matters listed there from Fire Note 3 confirmed or conformed as still acceptable?
I don't know that.
Do you know who the industry stakeholders were that she refers to?
No, I don't.
Can we look at your witness statement, please? Page 8, paragraph 25. And at the foot of the page, we can see paragraph 24 is the one we read before, about reliance on small-scale test data. You see that? And then if you look at paragraph 25, you say this: as a result, a Department of the Environment, DOE and Industry Collaborative Research Project was established to develop the first large-scale fire test methodology. This resulted in the publication in 1999 by BRE of Fire Note 9, assessing the fire performance of external cladding systems, a test method. And then it goes on. The test method set out in Fire Note 9 was first referenced in the 2000 edition of Approved Document B, Fire Safety, and there's a reference which is one of the guidance, turn the page, documents to the Building Regulations 2000 published by the Office of the Deputy Prime Minister, along with the first edition of BR 135, which was published in 1988. And if we go on, please, on page 9 to paragraph 27, you say this: this test method was published and referenced to control the hazards that might arise due to developments in the products, materials and components of cladding systems, and also included criteria to demonstrate an acceptable level of fire safety performance for cladding systems on the outside of masonry buildings. Now, from where or from whom did you learn about the reason for the development of Fire Note 9 that you've set out here?
It would have been in discussions with, at the time, I'm sure, Peter Field and Sarah Colwell.
And what was your involvement in those discussions?
Very little. I wasn't involved at all in the development of Fire Note 9.
Well, you were involved enough to be able to glean...
And the PII project, whatever it was, the collaborative project that was carried out, that was referred to.
Maybe we're at cross purposes. I asked you from where or from whom did you learn about what you've set out about your understanding of Fire Note 9? And you told us that it was in your discussions with Peter Field and Sarah Colwell. And my question is, what was your involvement in those discussions? What was the nature of your involvement in those discussions?
It would have just been feedback in terms of background to what was going to be done next. Because this was obviously a response to the Environment Subcommittee, the Parliamentary Inquiry, and whilst they put references in there and made reference to the first edition of BR 135, it was not really definitive guidance. There were no pass-fail criteria or anything like that in BR 135. It was guidance, and I think there was a recognition that that needed updating to reflect the types of systems and so on that were now in the market, as opposed to what was available in 1988, or pre-1988, in fact.
I'm just puzzled by the chronology. Was Fire Note 9 developed, as you've just told us, as a response to the Environment Subcommittee, the Parliamentary Inquiry, or did it predate that?
It predated that. It was published before that, wasn't it?
Yes. So how could it have been a response then to the...
No, I was talking about the paragraph above where the reference to it was put into the approved document.
I see. Now, looking at paragraph 27 of your statement there.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Was Fire Note 9 mainly developed because of the recognition, your word, that reliance on small-scale test data was not possible, as you've explained, or mainly because of developments in the products used, or a bit of both?
I suspect a bit of both. It's my belief that it was a bit of both.
Principally, what was the principal driver, though? Was it the inadequacy of small-scale test data?
Yes, the fact that you still needed a standardised approach for testing at large scale.
Now, I don't think we need to go to it, but Dr. Connelly says in his statement, and I summarise, that at the time of his experimental work in 1994, the idea was to move away from Class 0 and adopt compliance with the full-scale test. That's from his statement to paragraph 25C on page 15 at BRE 30476667. Assuming that is correct, do you know why there was so little movement in that direction in the years between 1994, the date of his tests, and 1999, the date of Fire Note 9 and the DETR Parliamentary Select Committee Inquiry?
No, I don't.
You don't? Do you know why there was so little movement even in the wake of the Select Committee's recommendation on full-scale testing in December 1999?
From what I can recollect, the decision was taken that the Fire Note 9 needed to be taken and turned into a British standard, and you could not actually put the reference to that BS standard in until it had been published.
Now,
so it's chicken and egg, isn't it? And work was done as quickly as it could be to progress that.
But the egg hatched at some stage, didn't it? In the sense that BS 8414 went in.
Yes.
But Diagram 40 and Class 0 were retained.
Yes.
The question is why?
I can't explain that other than what I said earlier about, the decisions as to what to leave in and what to take out were not taken by BRE, they are taken by other authorities based on consultation and input from BRAC and other constraints that the government departments may well be under.
Did you see a draft of the 2000 edition of the next edition of the approved document before it was published?
I don't recall seeing one, no.
Now, it was published in July 2000, but were you aware at some time before that Fire Note 9 was not going to replace testing to BS 476, Parts 6 and 7 and Diagram 40, but there would be just a passing mention of it in the text of the guidance as a possible alternative option?
No, I don't think I would have been aware of that.
Right. Are you able to tell us why that came about?
Why it was only given a passing mention? No, I don't know why.
Did you ask anybody at the department when you saw the 2000 edition why it was that Class 0 had been retained and there was only a passing reference to what had been Fire Note 9?
No, that was not an area that I was working in at that time. So other colleagues would have had such discussions with the department.
Right. Do you know which colleagues had those discussions with the department?
People such as Tony Morris and a colleague of his that used to work very closely with the department in terms of understanding and interpreting the research for them was Richard Reed.
Did you ever talk about this subject with any of those individuals?
No, I don't believe I did.
Do you know who made the decision that the full-scale test that the BRE had developed to the extent of Fire Note 9 would not replace Diagram 40 as the Select Committee recommended, but would sit alongside it?
No, I don't know.
I think you told us earlier that at the time the full-scale test might replace diagram 40 at some point in the future.
Yes.
Was that something that you had discussions about with anybody at the department?
I mean, it must have been something that, I don't know whether it was discussed with the department or whether it was my belief based on discussions that I'd had with BRE colleagues such as Peter Field and Sarah Colwell.
Can we then go back to the department's response to the committee's recommendations at 6th of April? It's a document you told us you hadn't seen, but let's just
I don't
see
recall seeing it. Yeah.
You don't recall seeing it. All right, let's go to it. CLG 140347, page 3, paragraph 9. And it says, the 1992 edition of the approved document to Part B, which was in force at the time I gave evidence to the committee last year, set out the recommended provisions for the fire protection of external surfaces of walls in diagrammatic form. However, in the new 2000 edition of the approved document to Part B, the test method mentioned in your recommendation, currently BRE Fire Note 9, is now quoted as an alternative to meeting these provisions for the external surfaces of walls. If we then go on to paragraph 11, it says this: when the technical amendments to the document have been completed and it's been adopted as a British standard, the department will amend the reference in the approved document to BRE Fire Note 9 to reflect its status as a British standard. We will also review whether the reference to this method of demonstrating compliance should be strengthened. It is unlikely that any such changes will be made immediately. The status of the test method is changed such minor amendments to the approved documents are difficult to promulgate to ensure that all users of the document are made aware of the change. However, supplements to the approved document are planned to give guidance on the new harmonised European methods of test, and the amendment would be included in this. Now, I know you say you don't recall seeing this document at the time, but were you aware that this was the department's response, the two paragraphs I've just read to you, 9 and 11?
No, I don't recall being aware of that.
Does it follow that you weren't aware in 2000 that the department's position was that following the adoption of the BRE's full-scale test as a British standard, it would review whether the reference to this method of demonstrating compliance should be strengthened?
Yeah, no, I wasn't aware of that. I don't recall being aware of that.
Do you recall any discussion about the possibility of substituting BRE's then Fire Note 9 as a test method for the existing requirements of Diagram 40, or at least going some way towards doing that?
No.
No. In fact, it's right, isn't it, that no such amendment to, quote, strengthen the reference to Fire Note 9, or indeed BS 8414 Part 1 as it became, was included in the supplement to the approved document on the harmonisation of European test methods in 2002?
Probably. I mean, I don't recall without going back and checking, but I mean, that would be...
So take it from me that it wasn't.
Okay.
Can you help us why that is the case?
No, I can't.
Do you remember any discussion with the BRE about that? About not strengthening the reference to include the reference to British Standard 8414?
No, not with me anyway.
And in fact, it's right, isn't it, that when the reference to BS 8414 came into the approved documents, as it did in the 2006 edition, published in April 2007, there was still no amendment to, quote, strengthen the reference, was there?
No, the reference would have just been changed to the BS 8414.
Yeah, exactly right.
Published standard.
And indeed, that's the case, isn't it, as far as you know, throughout all the amendments subsequently to the approved document?
Yes, correct.
So it's right, I think, that throughout these documents, BS 8414 was provided as an alternative, and only as an alternative route to compliance, alternative to meeting the provisions of 12.6 and Diagram 40, so far as external walls were concerned, over 18 metres.
Correct.
And only in December 2018 that the government did away with Class 0 in relation to external walls.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you just tell us, at what stage, over those years, 2000 to 2018, did you realise that the Select Committee's recommendation of replacing Class 0 with what became BS 8414 was not going to be followed, and that Class 0 was here to stay?
I don't recall at what point that that would have been foremost in my mind. I couldn't give you a date.
There's no point at which you asked yourself, given what you knew about and felt about Class 0 and knew about the recommendations from the Select Committee, I wonder why Class 0 is still there in approved document B.
Yes, I mean, what I would say is that, of course, you know, when they undertook the review in 2006, then the department went out to full consultation on the changes and also asked for, you know, industry's views on those changes, etc. And BRAC, again, would have been heavily involved in preparing all of that material and those documents. And it's really for those bodies, well, and say BRE has no authority in that. We can only express an opinion, and it is no more valid than anybody else's opinion.
Well, it may not be more valid, but it would certainly be more influential, wouldn't it, given the historic relationship between BRE and government, even after privatisation?
Well, not necessarily, no.
Not your experience?
No.
You say that industry's views on the changes were sought. It is part of the consultation in 2006. Do you know whether industry was asked the question, should we retain Class 0?
I don't know without going back and looking. I mean, there certainly was a lot of debate and a lot of consideration given to the retention of the national classes, not just Class 0, but the national classes in general in the approved document.
Given the indicated direction of travel in 2000, did there never come a point when you, even in a casual moment with your contacts in the department, you being the points person at the BRE, you ever say to them, what's happened to BS 8414 taking over from Class 0, as the Select Committee recommended back in 1999?
I don't recall having that direct conversation on that one particular issue with them.
Given,
I mean, the approved document obviously covers a big, broad range of matters in relation to the different classes.
Given the BRE's interests in what became BS 8414 and the expansion of the testing that you would be able to achieve, and therefore the concomitant increase in your income, why didn't you press government on getting rid of Class 0 as recommended and adopting BS 8414 as the standard?
Well, that's not the motivation for BRE. It wasn't about us increasing the income into that income stream. I mean, the whole point of producing Fire Note 9 as a British standard was to make it more available to other laboratories, etc., so that they could indeed invest and begin to carry out testing in those areas as well. It was to make it, you know, a proper standard that others could also test to.
What I'm really suggesting to you is that you had two motives for pushing what the Select Committee had recommended, namely substitution of Class 0 with the full-scale, full-system test. One was financial and the other was fire safety in the public interest. Would you accept that?
Yes, fire safety in the public interest. That said, I say, you know, there are other authorities that are looking at these things, and BRE's voice was one of many, and, you know, did not necessarily carry any greater weight than anybody else's.
I wonder if that's really right. It's right, isn't it, that in fact the BRE was contracted in by government to do lots of things, including advising on the amendments to the approved documents, approved document B, in 2006?
Well, we could produce the technical evidence base and provide them with the information, but we were not the decision makers.
No, I'm not suggesting that you were the decision makers. What I'm asking you is what insights you had into the rationale for those who were making the decision.
Yes, I don't recall that conversation happening. So I really can't offer any further information around that point.
Let's then turn to 2001 and CC 1924, which was the review of the fire performance of external cladding systems and also the revision of BR 135. First, you'll recall, I think, that there was a project which BRE bid for in late 1999 after Garnock and after the Select Committee, which was the review of fire performance of external cladding systems and the revision of BRE 135.
Yes.
Yes. And that was under a contract called CC 1924.
Probably, yes.
Yeah. I mean, take it from me, it's got a label, and that's what we refer to. Were you involved in that project, Dr. Smith?
Not directly, no.
Not directly. During the project, I think your position within the BRE was head of the reaction to fire team, as we've already seen.
Right.
Did you become involved in the bid for the CC 1924 project?
I think the bid would have been prepared by Dr. Colwell. I may have seen it and made some comments on it. I don't recall. And I don't know who signed the bid off. It may well have been, at that time, Peter Field.
Let's go to BRE 3041836, please. This is the first page of the bid document.
Okay.
As you can see, and it bears the date 23rd of December 1999. The BRE project manager is Mrs. S. Colwell, and you can see the title to it. There are a number of versions of this document, but if you to stick with that, I think at that time, still, you were Sarah Colwell's line manager, weren't you?
I was, yes.
Yeah. And if we go, please, to page 11, under the scope of work, you can see a second paragraph there, which says, in the second line, the quality in terms of the technical detail of the work and the outputs and the timeliness of delivery will be supervised and monitored throughout the project by Dr. D.A. Smith as Director of the Centre for Reaction to Fire and Mr. P. Field, Director of FRS Operations.
Yes.
And then if you go to the sixth paragraph down under the heading Project Organisation and Staffing, that reads, in the second line, the project will be led by Mrs. S. Colwell, Senior Consultant, Centre for Reaction to Fire, under the supervision of Dr. D.A. Smith as Director for Centre for Reaction to Fire. The quality and timeliness of the outputs is monitored by Mr. P. Field, Director of FRS Operations.
Yes.
And then if you go to page 12, please, in the middle of the page, you can see that on page 12 it says, just after the two bullet points under project responsibilities, all activity on the project shall be subject to the supervision and quality control of Dr. D.A. Smith. Now, can we take it from that is an accurate record of your relationship to this project and your responsibilities on it?
As laid down in this, yes, but Sarah would have consulted me as and when she needed to. Yes.
Can you tell us, how did you provide the supervision and quality control for this project?
I don't recall all of the details of that.
In what way did you supervise Dr. Colwell's work?
I mean, obviously, she would have designed the programme, because it was a test programme. She would have designed that. I'm sure we would have sat down and reviewed the test programme that she was proposing to do, and would have discussed potentially why she'd chosen to do one thing as opposed to something else. You know, I might have during that discussion said, have you thought about X? It's that kind of discussion. I mean, it doesn't mean that you are stood in the laboratory looking over somebody's shoulder all the time. That's not what that means in this context.
Can we go to page 3, this document? And we can see the objectives, the project objectives there, and there are 3 bullet points. To review the guidance contained within the approved documents that serve the building regulations with regard to external cladding systems on multi-storey buildings, in particular fire stopping between floors and surface spread of flame, to update and maintain the building regulations and associated guidance based on a series of experimental studies on new and existing cladding systems, to support the process of regulation and harmonisation with Europe. And then under those general objectives, you can see that there are some specific objectives of the DETR set out there. And we can see them carry out a survey of the existing multi-storey building stock in Great Britain in order to determine the composition and design of systems and the changing nature of materials currently in use within 3 months of the start date, to produce a simple database of the results of the survey, including cladding type, application, and the respective market share within 3 months of the start date, to review and update the existing guidance given in BRE report BR 135, etc. And then over the page, if we go over the page, to complete an experimental program, etc., to utilise large-scale scenario-based tests to determine the most appropriate method for specifying the fire performance requirements of cladding systems, and then other things as well, as you can see. Just on that last bullet point, I want to focus, but did all of those particular objectives listed in the bid document remain as objectives and unchanged through the life of the project?
I don't recall.
Now, as part of the project, do you recall that an IAG, an industry advisory group, was established by the BRE?
Yes, that would not be unusual.
And what was its purpose?
The industry advisory groups or stakeholder groups or steering groups, as they can be called any one of those things, is for them to basically understand what's going to be done in the project, for them to provide input to the project. They have generally real world experience that the research teams at BRE at the time did not have, and they're able to also advise on choices and selections of different materials and so on. So that they're usually sent documents as well to review, reports and so on to comment on during the course of the project. So if you produce a draft output, they will typically get a copy of the draft output, and we'll have the opportunity to look at that and provide feedback. And yeah, I think that probably just about covers it.
Thank you. Can we go to BRE 401392? This is the first page of the annual progress report, 1st of April 2000 to 30th of April 2001, under CC 1924. You can see from page 2 that is, page 1, 27th of April 2001 is the date. We've just shot past it, but that's what it said. If we go to page 5, we can look under the heading Formation of the IAG. And I'm sorry, I'm rushing ahead a little bit too fast. Can we go, please, to page 2? We can see on page 2 your name there.
Yes, as the approver.
As the approver, prepared for Anthony Bird, yes?
Yes.
By Sarah Colwell.
Yes.
Now, let's go then to page 5 and look at the heading Formation of the IAG. 30 groups were invited, as you can see, to join the industry advisory group for this project, and they included representatives from manufacturers, rain screen systems, rendered systems and built-up systems, specifiers and building owners and users. Now, under that list, we can see that it's reported, as you can see below, that 27 representatives of the 30 accepted the invitation to join, And the members of the IAG group are then listed on page 9. If we go to that, you can see table 1 there, page 9. Members of the IAG, and there they are. And of the 27, the list includes 5 members of BRE staff, as well as Dr Jackman from the Loss Prevention Council. We've got 3 government employees, including Anthony Bird, and we've got people from the BBA, CWCT, you see that? And various manufacturers and industry associations, yes? Yes.
Yes.
Do you know who had decided which manufacturers, specifiers and building owners and users would be invited to join the IAG?
Usually, the way that works is a list is drafted up and then it's discussed and circulated with the department, and they typically have, the final say in agreeing that that is an appropriate and balanced group of people that will add value to the project.
Right. So the department had final say, even though this was your project?
Typically.
Right.
Yes.
I see. And was it envisaged that all aspects of the work on the project would be shared with the IAG, or did the group have a particular role?
It's not normal for you to not share the project. When you have a meeting, then the work that's been done would be presented back to the IAG. It might be they might be given hard copy format, but it also might be in the form of just a verbal update as to what's happened. Problems will be discussed with them if we've run into problems with the project for any reason. It's usually a very sort of open dialogue. They are there to assist the project, and if you don't share with some degree of openness what you are doing and how you're doing it, then you're not going to get the best feedback from them.
Yes. Now, to meet the objectives of this project, I think several reports were produced, weren't they? One of which was a literature review.
Probably, yes. I mean, the outputs would be listed in the proposal usually.
Can we go to BRE 401353, please? This is a letter of the 30th of March 2000 to Mr. Payne, who is Mick Payne, I think, at AEA Technology.
Correct.
And it comes from Sarah Colwell, copied to Anthony Bird and Mr. Troughton, sending the literature review to him.
Yes.
If we go, please, to page 4, we can see the actual report itself, which is where it starts, and you'll see that the report is prepared by Sarah Colwell, J. Foster, B. Martin, Centre for Reaction to Fire, and the date is the 30th of March 2000, and it's signed by you, yes?
Yes,
approving
correct.
it as the centre head.
Yes.
Who is J. Foster?
Jason Foster was somebody that joined us as a graduate. I don't know how long he'd been at BRE by that time. And obviously Brian, Brian was not part of the Reaction to Fire Centre, but that...
What was the basic purpose of this review?
Well, I presume if you go through it will explain in the introduction.
Well, what was your understanding?
I can't recall at the time without looking at, having my memory jogged and the scope of what was being undertaken.
We know what your relationship was hierarchically with Sarah Colwell at the time. What was Brian Martin's role at this point, March 2000?
March 2000, Brian sat in, so we had 2 centres within the fire research activities. Sarah and the Reaction to Fire Centre were in my centre, and I had a colleague called Nigel Smithies who was the centre head for the other area of activity, and Brian Martin sat within Nigel's centre.
And what was that centre?
Can't remember what it was called. I'd have to go back and look.
What did it do?
It basically had a group of activities that sat within it. It included fire investigation at that time, sat within that centre. All of the support work that Brian was doing in relation to the approved document and the technical secretariat work and so on sat within that centre. There was also a group looking at fire suppression, research into fire suppression technologies. There was a group looking at smoke control and fire detection.
What was your role as the person signing it off?
So as the approver of this, basically you're looking at the report when it comes to you, you're looking for sort of obvious typographical mistakes and so on. You're looking to check that the right template's being used because they were all agreed and it was quite strict with the contractual side of things that you had to present the reports in a specific way on specific templates. And then just a pair of eyes looking at it that had not been involved in the day-to-day work and actually doing the work, but to see if there was anything in there that basically doesn't make sense, didn't read correctly, and so on. But it's not the job of the approver to go back and repeat the work. You're reviewing the work that other people have done. So, a review of a document like this would typically take, half a day maximum.
What was Sarah Colwell's role in this review?
Well, Sarah would have led the project team in carrying out the work. I don't know exactly what parts she would have done personally.
Was that not your role as approver to find out?
Well, I can't remember now. I mean, we would have known at the time, I'm sure, but I did not know. I can't tell you now.
What was Brian Martin's role in this report, do you know?
I can't remember the contents. Have we got the contents?
Yes, let's go to page 6. You'll see the executive
report,
summary.
Please.
If we can have that expanded, please. So you can see that it says that the paper identifies and summarises 3 bullet points. Types of external cladding systems currently in use, current requirements and guidance given in approved document B 2000 revision, and the research previously undertaken on external fire spread in buildings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then there are findings.
Yes.
So that's what it was about.
Yes.
Does that help? What was Brian? My question was, coming back to it, what was Brian Martin's
So
role?
Brian Martin would certainly have been leading on the second bullet point, the current requirements and guidance as given in the approved document and its revision. Sarah, I would say, would have led on the research previously undertaken on external fire spread on buildings and types of external cladding systems currently in use. I mean, that could have been, I don't know whether that was done jointly between the two of them or whether one or the other would have taken the primary lead on that.
Now, at the time, I think it's right that, isn't it, that the revisions to approved document B, 2000 revision, was still in draft because I think they weren't published until the July of that year, and this document is dated March.
That may well be true. I don't know the exact timelines.
So is it right that Brian Martin would be leading on, when it says the current requirements and guidance, the draft current guidance?
Probably, in that case.
And why do you say Brian Martin would have led on point 2? Was his role focused on ADB back in 2000? It was?
Yes, so Brian was a building control professional by background.
Right.
And so he had real-world experience of the approved documents and how to apply them and so on, which obviously was not true of people that had come from a research background.
Was anybody other than Brian Martin at the BRE at the time as experienced or expert, if that's the right word, on the approved documents as Brian Martin?
Yes, so, and I can't remember when he retired, but Brian, in effect, took over and was recruited for a period of time anyway, to work alongside somebody called Richard Reed.
You mentioned him before.
Yeah, who again was a building control professional by background, and had practiced and worked and had real world experience.
Do you know whether this report was reviewed by the department before it was finalised?
That was the typical process, so I'd be surprised if it wasn't.
Right.
I mean, they typically you would submit a report and then they would come back with any comments or questions or queries or clarifications that they needed. And, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, we are a long way from finishing the topic before 4:30. It's simply not possible, looking at my notes. But we are in a natural sub-break. So I'm going to ask you, I think, to call an end for the day now, and we can come back to this very document, I think, but tomorrow morning.
Yes.
Sorry to break in the middle of a document, but...
Don't think it'll be tomorrow, then, Mr. Bennett.
No, wait, Monday. The next available.
Well, we don't usually finish even a few minutes early, but there's obviously a good reason to do so today. We've reached a natural point. So we'll break there. We'll resume. I mean, I know you were expecting to come back next week anyway, weren't you?
Yes, indeed.
That wasn't a surprise. So we'll resume, please, on Monday morning at 10 o'clock.
Okay.
We'll look forward to seeing you then, and please take care over the weekend not to discuss your evidence or anything relating to it with anyone else.
Thank you.
All right?
Yes.
Thank you. So if you'd like to go with the usher, that's it for the day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Millett. 10 o'clock on Monday then.
Monday. Thank you.